Hello and welcome to the 2026 Anti-Oppression Training. My name is Nina and I am the Research Coordinator at the Ontario Public Interest Research Group Ottawa chapter. It is my pleasure to be your host and trainer for today. I want to begin this training by acknowledging that we are in unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory. And I would also like to take a moment to voice gratefulness for Mother Earth, which is one of the important aspects of doing a land acknowledgement. It is not only to acknowledge those whose territories we do our work in, but it's also a honoring to the earth, which makes life possible for all of us. And so I want to start us by grounding ourselves in the soil, which is the germinating ground where life and death collide, creating the conditions for livable ecologies. The earth, wind, and water sustains life through interconnection. Wind scatters seeds, whispers through forest, and shapes migrations. It links ecosystems, reminding us of the intricate web of life. Water flowing through rivers and oceans nurtures life, balances climates, and supports biodiversity. Yet these forces too are threatened by human interventions, pollution, damming, and climate change. We humans are neither dominators of nature nor wholly one with it. We are not one, and we are not alone. Our existence is interwoven with the earth, wind, and water. These forces flow through us as we move through them, compelling us to recognize our responsibility within the larger web of life. Let this homage remind us of our shared accountability to care for and coexist with the vibrant living world. For today's training, we will be discussing the concept of race and why it is essential to acknowledge it, unraveling the colonial mind, key concepts for anti-oppression, what is systemic oppression, intersectionality, ableism, and norma, norma, normality. Sorry, difficult word to pronounce. And conclusions. So I want to start by talking about the invention of race. This is a concept that shapes so much of our world, but is at its core a human-made construct. The idea of race, as we understand it today, evolved alongside the formation of the United States and was intricately tied to two other terms, white and slave. These words, race, white, and slave, are already in use were already in use by Europeans in the 1500s and brought with them to North America. However, their meanings were very different from what they have come to represent today. As American society developed, these words took on new meanings, reshaped by the specific social, economic, and political needs of that time. Before the 1500s, the term race was used frequently and referred to groups of people connected by kinship or a shared community. It was not about physical traits or appearance. The modern use of race, which categorizes people based on physical characteristics, is entirely a human invention. This shift began during the 17th century, a period influenced by the European Enlightenment. Philosophers and naturalists of the time emphasized secular reasoning, rationality, and scientific study over faith-based understandings of the world. They sought to categorize everything, including people. What started as a pursuit of knowledge turned into a dangerous ideology. These thinkers proposed that there were natural laws governing not only the world but also human beings. Over time, their ideas evolved into the false belief that white people were inherently superior, smarter, more capable, and more human than non-white people. This ideology became a justification for European colonization, the enslavement of African people, and the exploitation of non-European peoples worldwide. By embedding these beliefs into global systems of power and economy, the concepts of race was used to uphold inequality, exploitation, and oppression, a legacy that persists to this day. Understanding the invention of race is essential to dismantling the system of oppression it has sustained. It reminds us that these ideas were created by humans, and what humans have created, we can also choose to challenge and change. Today, we acknowledge that we are a diverse species and we come in many shapes, colors, sizes, genders, sexes, expressions, abilities, and styles. Our minds and emotions process and express themselves in a variety of ways. Our relationships, families, and ways of loving are expressed, built, and sustained in a variety of ways. So you may be asking yourself by now, what is the purpose or goal of this training? Well, it is an invitation to untangle the colonial mind. Getting deep into our colonial beliefs and unraveling them is a lifetime journey, one that requires courage, resilience, persistence, and commitment. I remember the first time I was confronted with my own internalized colonial beliefs. It was during a group discussion about privilege in higher education, and someone pointed out how I unconsciously upheld Eurocentric standards in my perception of success. At first, I felt defensive, my mind racing to justify my actions, but beneath that defensiveness, I felt the sting of truth. It took courage to sit with that discomfort and confront my own fears, the fear of being wrong, of being complicit. It required resilience to recover from the sense of defeat when I realized how deeply entrenched these beliefs were, and persistence to keep revisiting those moments where it hurt the most. To challenge the paradigms I had unknowingly embraced. Over time, I learned that this journey isn't about perfection, but about commitment to stay on the path even when it's uncomfortable, commitment to facilitate conversations that expose the harm caused by systemic oppression, commitment to support others who have suffered, and to hold accountable those who perpetuate these systems. This is not an easy road, but it is a necessary one. Each of us must take it at our own pace, with the understanding that progression is not linear. This training is just the start, a call to action to embrace the lifelong work of untangling the colonial mind for ourselves, for others, and for a more just world. Therefore, we will need courage to confront our own beliefs and fears, resilience to recover when we feel attacked and defeated, persistency to keep going where it hurts and challenge beliefs and paradigms within us and around us. And lastly, commitment to stay on this road. Volunteer to facilitate the work, support others that have suffered oppression, and challenge those that are reinforcing systemic oppression. Today, I have the privilege of introducing you to some key concepts essential to understanding anti oppression work. As we dive into this, I want to remind you that we're only scratching the surface. These ideas are vast and deeply interconnected, and unpacking them fully would take far longer than an hour and a half, and we have together. That said, let's start by laying a foundation with four critical concepts: colonization, colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy. Colonialism, colonization. Colonization refers to the process by which one group of people takes control of another group's land, resources, and culture, often through force or coercion. This involves the imposition of the colonizer's language, religion, and systems of governance, leading to the suppression or erasure of the original inhabitants' ways of life. Colonization disrupts self determination and sovereignty, leaving a legacy of systemic inequality that persists today. Colonialism is a system and structure that maintain and perpetuate the control and exploitation initiated through colonization. It is not a historical phenomenon, but an ongoing process where wealth, power, and resources are extracted from marginalized communities for the benefit of dominant groups. Colonialism reinforces global power imbalances and continues to shape political, social, and economic systems. Capitalism is an economic system where private ownership and profit driven the production and distribution of goods and services. While it is often associated with innovation and growth, capitalism also thrives on exploitation, creating and perpetuating inequality. It values profit over people, leading to the commodification of labor, resources, and even human lives. The intersection of capitalism with colonialism has been particularly devastating as it institutionalized the exploitation of marginalized groups to accumulate wealth for the powerful. Patriarchy is a social system that privileges men, particularly cisgender heterosexual men, over others, granting them power and dominance in societal, cultural, and familial structures. It enforces rigid gender roles and norms that disadvantage women, non binary people, and gender diverse individuals while also harming men by limiting their emotional expression and humanity. Patriarchy intersects with other systems of oppression, such as colonialism and capitalism, to uphold a hierarchy of power. These four concepts, colonization, colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy, form the foundations of systems that produce and reproduce oppression. They do not exist in isolation, but are deeply intertwined, reinforcing and sustaining each other. As we continue with our training, I encourage you to reflect on these systems, question their impact, and consider how we can collectively challenge them to create a more just and equitable world. So, what is oppression? It is a pervasive and perverse system of supremacy and discrimination perceived as normal. The domination occurs on individual, cultural, and structural levels in the society. Like other systems, it develops mechanisms to persevere over time. Personal oppression usually involves negative stereotypes or prejudice, bullying, harassment, violence, etc., also covert forms of domination. Cultural oppression usually involves dominant groups creating and maintaining hierarchical divisions to universalize and impose its own culture as superior. Structural oppression usually involves the ways in which oppression is institutionalized and legitimized in society, laws, social practices, institutions, economic and political systems, how they favor the dominant group at the expense of non-dominant group. Systemic oppression and white supremacy in North America. Let's start defining the connection. In North America, systemic oppression is often equated with white supremacy. White supremacy is rooted in colonial systems that establish dominance and continue to influence societal structures today. The concept of the other, historically, the other has been exhibited to evoke emotions such as amazement, anxiety, or disgust, often symbolizing domination or exclusion. This dynamic persists, reinforcing systems of oppression. System, Systemic frameworks. Systems of oppression are inherited from colonial practices. These frameworks perpetuate assimilation, forcing marginalized communities, especially indigenous people, to conform to dominant norms. Inter- Intersectionality in oppression. Oppression operates at the intersection of culture, religion, and colonial systems. Communities often experience internalized oppression, perpetuating these systems within their own groups. Modern manifestations, white supremacy, and privilege are ongoing realities, not historical relics. They sustain an environment where one group is positioned as superior to others. Understanding privilege and oppression, recognizing intersectionality is crucial to understanding personal privileges and systemic oppression. Competitive oppression and a Eurocentric worldview continue to dominate societal values. Everyday examples, classrooms and grading systems reflect Eurocentric and hierarchical frameworks, reinforcing systematic inequalities. Some key takeaways of systemic oppression as equivalent to white supremacy are to dismantle systemic oppression. We must critically examine colonial legacies, understand intersectionality, and challenge the structures that sustain white supremacy and privilege. So, what is intersectionality? Intersectionality is an original framework from Kimberly Crenshaw, and it illuminates that an intersectional paradigm illuminates the ways in which different forms of oppression are all interconnected and therefore cannot be viewed separately from one another. Here's a short video explaining it further. Now that you've watched the video, I'd like to introduce you to the Wheel of Power and Privilege, a tool that helps us explore how privilege and marginalization intersect within our identities and experiences. The wheel is divided into categories of social identity such as race, gender, ability, and more. The center of the wheel represents greater privilege and power, while the outer edges signify less privilege or experiences of marginalization. It is important to remember that privilege and power are not fixed, they are contextual. They can shift depending on the environment, situation, or system in which we find ourselves. For example, a person might hold privilege in one area of their identity while experiencing marginalization in another. People can be marginalized based on many factors, including social position, gender, wealth, and more. Intersectionality, a concept that highlights how different identities and forms of oppression overlap, help us understand how these intersections shape individual, family, and community outcomes. Now, take 5 minutes to circle where you are within the wheel. Now that you have completed the wheel, I want to share a personal example to illustrate the importance of checking our privileges. I come from a poor, uneducated family. Education was not a given for me. It was something I had to work hard to achieve. Yet I recognize that education is one of my privileges. Why is it a privilege? Because my experience as an immigrant in Canada has been easier thanks to my education and upbringing. Despite the challenges I faced, my education has opened doors that might have otherwise have remained closed. I also have the privilege of not experiencing war in my country of origin, although I have endured state violence. I have faced discrimination and stereotyping for being a woman and a Latina, yet I acknowledge that I have other privileges. I am cisgender, so I am not discriminated against for my gender identity. I also have the privilege of an able body, which shields me from the systemic barriers faced by people with disabilities. Acknowledging my privileges helps me confront my unconscious biases and untangle the colonial mindset I've inherited. This process allows me to recognize how systemic oppression operates and to use my experience and privileges as tools to mobilize and advocate within my own community. But let me be clear, this is not about me and my privileges. It is about understanding and addressing systemic oppression. It's about recognizing how systems are designed to advantage some while disadvantaging others, and using that awareness to challenge those systems. By acknowledging our privileges, we begin to see the larger structures at play. And that's where the work of dismantling oppression truly begins. Now that we have reflected on our own privileges, I will discuss how systems of oppression become normalized. So, we already discussed that oppression creates a pervasive and perverse system of supremacy and discrimination perceived as normal, that the system develops mechanisms to persevere over time. Institutional, economic, social structures will reproduce inequalities in ways that are perceived as normal. The different models to define and enforce the idea of normal, states, institutions, state forces, schools, teachers, health institutions, health practitioners, religions, researchers use the definitions of normal to dehumanize, marginalize, dominate all those that are considered deviances. But what can be missing? When we talk about oppression, we cannot ignore ableism. It is a fundamental piece of the puzzle. Ableism operates through systems that enforce and uphold ideas of what is deemed normal. These ideas are constructed and reinforced by a variety of entities, states, institutions, schools, families, health systems, religious organizations, and even by researchers. They all contribute to defining normal in ways that dehumanize, marginalize, and dominate those who fall outside these narrow definitions. Ableism is not just an abstract concept, it's a system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on societal structures of normalcy, intelligence, and excellence. These constructs are not neutral or accidental. They are deeply rooted in histories of anti-Blackness, eugenics, and capitalism. This systemic oppression shapes how society determines who is valuable and worthy. It dictates whose existence is prioritized based on their appearance, their ability to perform or excel, and their capacity to conform to expected behaviors. I want to share a powerful working definition by Talila T.L. Lewis, who describes ableism as, and I quote, a system that places value on people's bodies and minds based on societal constructed ideas of normalcy, intelligence, and excellence. This definition calls us to recognize how these constructs are intertwined with larger systems of oppression and how they perpetrate harm in ways we must actively resist. To understand this more deeply, let's examine the models often used to define and enforce normality. The first is the medical model. This model focuses on fixing individuals to conform to societal norms. It treats difference as a problem to be solved or corrected. Two, the charity model. This frames individuals with disabilities as objects of pity and reliance, stripping them away their autonomy and agency. Third, the security model. This model aims to control or segregate those perceived as risks to society, often through institutionalization or exclusion. Four, the eugenic model. Perhaps the most insidious, this model devalues diversity entirely, promoting an ideal of perfection that leads to exclusion, eradication, or even violence against those who don't fit the mold. Each of these models reinforces systemic oppression by upholding and institutionalizing harmful notions of normality. They perpetuate a cycle of dehumanization that we must challenge and dismantle. We have reached our conclusions, and so I'll briefly do a recap for you. It's been lovely spending this half hour with you, and I hope that what you learned today can be nourishing and fruitful for your own life and your own work. So today we've taken our first step, a very superficial one, into understanding the foundations of oppression. While this is just the beginning, it's an important starting point. Unpacking these systems requires ongoing reflection and questioning. Why do these systems exist? How do they operate? When and where do I position myself within them? These are essential questions, and answering them requires honesty, discomfort, and a willingness to grow. There is so much more to explore beyond the concepts we've touched on today. We must also delve into other forms of oppression like homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism, and many others. Each intersect with the systems of colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy in complex and powerful ways. This work is challenging and requires more than a single session. It's a lifelong commitment, but every step, no matter how small, moves us closer to a world rooted in equity, justice, and liberation. Starting with oneself will allow us to find answers and holding each other accountable, including family, community leaders, administrators, and politicians. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Let's continue to question, learn, and take action together.